My name is Hazel, and I'm 28 years old. There I was at my sister Amber's dream wedding, tucked behind a massive stone pillar where no one could see me. Me, the bride's only sister, hidden away like a shameful secret, while everyone else laughed and celebrated. Years of Amber's subtle cruelty had culminated in this ultimate humiliation. I wiped away tears, wondering how family could hurt this deeply when a hand appeared before me. I looked up to find the most handsome groomsman extending his fingers toward mine. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, with genuine warmth in his eyes. Before I continue this story of heartbreak and redemption, let me know where you're watching from today. If you've ever felt betrayed by family, drop a like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength when the people who should love you most let you down. Trust me, what happens next changed everything. Growing up with Amber wasn't easy. From the beginning, our dynamic was set by our parents' obvious favoritism. My sister was everything Margaret and George Wilson wanted in a daughter conventionally beautiful, with straight-A grades and athletic achievements that filled our living room shelves with trophies. I was the opposite creative, quirky, and perpetually struggling to find my place both at home and at school. "Amber just knows how to apply herself," my mother would say, with a sigh after my report cards came home with B's and C's in subjects that didn't capture my imagination. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" I remember clearly the moment I realized my place in our family hierarchy. I was 12 and had finally made it to the regional art competition after months of working on my mixed media piece. The awards ceremony was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, the same time as one of Amber's volleyball tournaments. "We'll try to make it to your thing after her game," my dad promised, ruffling my hair without making eye contact. They never showed. I stood alone with my second-place ribbon while other parents took photos and celebrated with their children. When I got home, Amber was already the center of attention, her team having won the tournament. "Sorry, we missed your art thing, honey," my mother said distractedly while hanging Amber's new medal on our wall of achievements, a wall notably absent of any of my accomplishments. "But look, your sister is going to state—" I learned that day to swallow disappointment and hide my hurt. It became a skill I perfected over the years. By the time we reached adulthood, I'd built a successful career as a graphic designer despite my parents' concerns about that artsy phase never ending. I had my own apartment in the city, good friends and clients who appreciated my creativity. But that childhood need for approval never quite went away. When Amber called to announce her engagement to Ryan, a successful investment banker she'd been dating for 2 years, I felt genuinely happy for her. When she followed that announcement by asking me to be her maid of honor, I was shocked and moved. Finally, I thought a chance to heal our relationship and be the sisters we never quite managed to be. "Of course I'll be your maid of honor," I said already, mentally designing custom invitations and planning a spectacular bachelorette weekend. My first disappointment came just 3 days later. Amber had hired Melissa, an exclusive wedding planner known for celebrity weddings, who promptly informed me that all creative decisions had already been made. "Amber wants a very specific aesthetic," Melissa explained with thinly veiled condescension when I offered to design the invitations. "We're going with Belvedere designs. They're very exclusive." I swallowed my hurt when I saw the generic, overpriced invitations Amber had chosen. I bit my tongue when she selected a bachelorette destination I knew I could barely afford. I smiled through venue visits where my opinions were solicited, and then immediately dismissed. "This is her special day," I reminded myself repeatedly. "It's not about you." I was at our parents' house for Sunday dinner when Amber casually dropped the next bomb. "Oh, by the way," she said, scrolling through her phone as she spoke, not even looking up at me. "Mom wants to talk to you about your dress. She has some concerns." The way she smirked slightly told me everything I needed to know. Whatever was coming, it wouldn't be good. The concerns about my bridesmaid dress turned out to be exactly what I feared. My mother cornered me in the kitchen after dinner, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper she used when discussing anything related to weight or appearance. "Sweetie, Amber showed me the bridesmaid dresses, and I'm a little worried about how they might fit you," she said, eyes darting to my midsection. "They're very fitted around the middle. Maybe we could find you a good nutritionist. 10 pounds would make all the difference." The dress Amber had selected was a column-style satin gown in a pale peach color that would wash out my complexion completely. The sample she'd shown me was 2 sizes too small, ensuring I'd look stuffed into it no matter what I did in the next 4 months. Later that week, I stopped by Amber's apartment to discuss the dress situation directly. As I approached her door, I heard laughter inside Amber and what sounded like her friends Brittany and Madison. She'll look like a stuffed sausage, Amber was saying through giggles. Mom almost choked trying to suggest a diet without saying diet. Why is she even in your wedding party? One of her friends asked. Mom would literally never speak to me again if I didn't include her, Amber replied with an exaggerated sigh. Family obligation. I stood frozen outside her door, hand poised to knock as tears pricked my eyes. Taking a deep breath, I rapped on the door harder than necessary. The laughing stopped abruptly. When Amber opened the door, her face registered momentary shock before settling into a practiced smile. Hazel, we were just talking about you, she said, ushering me in. I heard, I replied quietly. The room went silent as Brittany and Madison exchanged uncomfortable glances. Amber's smile didn't falter. Don't be so sensitive, she said, patting my arm condescendingly. We were just having some fun. You know how stressful wedding planning is. When her friends had left, I tried to have an honest conversation about the dress. Amber, I know you want your wedding to be perfect, but this dress style really doesn't work for my body type. Could we find something similar, but maybe with a different cut? Her expression hardened immediately. It's my wedding, Hazel. The dresses are already ordered. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You always want to make everything about you. That's not what I'm losing. Every major life event I have you try to pull focus, she continued, building momentum. Remember my college graduation? You showed up with pink hair. That was 10 years ago, I said, bewildered. And you never told me it bothered you. Because it's always about what Hazel wants. The creative special one who needs all the attention. The unfairness of her accusation left me speechless. In what universe had I ever received more attention than Amber? That night I lay awake, considering whether to drop out of the wedding party. But the thought of the family fallout, the disappointed looks from my father, the lectures from my mother, the narrative of me being difficult and selfish that would follow kept me committed to seeing it through. 2 weeks later came the bridal shower, hosted at my parents' house and organized primarily by my mother and Melissa. I'd spent weeks creating a custom wedding memory book for Amber, hand-binding the pages and incorporating photos from throughout our lives, along with spaces for wedding mementos. When gift opening time came, my carefully wrapped present was placed at the bottom of the pile. By the time Amber reached it, most guests were distracted, picking at dessert or checking phones. Her cursory thanks and immediate setting aside of the book I'd poured my heart into was yet another small heartbreak. Throughout the afternoon, I noticed Brittany deliberately angling me out of photos and conversations shifting whenever I approached groups of Amber's friends. At one point, I overheard Madison whispering to another bridesmaid, I don't know why she even made her a bridesmaid. They don't seem close at all. As I drove home that evening, tears streaming down my face, I made a promise to myself I would fulfill my duties with grace and dignity, then step back from this relationship that had caused me pain for as long as I could remember. I just needed to get through the next 6 weeks. The bachelorette weekend in Miami arrived with a flurry of last-minute details that should have been warning signs. The itinerary appeared in our group chat just 48 hours before departure, a packed schedule of exclusive clubs, high-end restaurants, and spa treatments that would stretch my credit card to its limit. I'd saved for months, cutting back on groceries and canceling my therapy sessions to afford this weekend. As I packed my suitcase, I kept reminding myself, this is for Amber. Just get through this weekend. Our first night in Miami, I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, as was my habit. The hostess led me to our reserved table where Melissa, the wedding planner, was already sitting furiously typing on her phone. Oh, Hazel, she said, barely looking up. You're not at this table. Brittany arranged a separate seating chart. You're at the high top near the bar. A separate table, but I'm the maid of... Technically, Brittany is handling most of the maid of honor duties now, Melissa cut in with practiced diplomacy. Amber thought it would be easier since you're so busy with work. This was news to me. I'd taken time off specifically to handle bachelorette planning, only to have every suggestion ignored. From my isolated high top, I watched as Amber arrived to cheers and hugs from her friends. She air-kissed me briefly before rejoining her main table where champagne was already flowing. Throughout dinner, I sat alone, occasionally making awkward conversation with servers who clearly thought I wasn't actually part of the party. After several glasses of wine, Amber made her way to my table, draped herself over the chair opposite me, and leaned in with alcohol-fueled false intimacy. I need to tell you something as my sister, she slurred slightly. That outfit isn't doing you any favors. And maybe ease up on the appetizers. The wedding is only 8 weeks away. She gestured vaguely at my body, then continued without waiting for my response. Also, are you seeing anyone yet? It's kind of embarrassing having a perpetually single bridesmaid. People will think there's something wrong with you. The restaurant suddenly felt too hot, too loud. I couldn't catch my breath as Amber continued her assessment of all my perceived flaws. My chest tightened as her voice seemed to come from farther and farther away. I mumbled something about the restroom and stumbled toward the back of the restaurant. In the bathroom stall, I slid down against the wall, gasping for air as silent tears streamed down my face. A full-blown panic attack gripped me, my first in nearly 2 years. A gentle knock on the stall door eventually pulled me back to reality. "Hazel, are you okay in there?" It was Brittany, surprisingly. I wiped my face and opened the door expecting mockery. Instead, Brittany looked genuinely concerned. "I've had panic attacks too," she said quietly, offering a damp paper towel. "Do you need some water or something?" This unexpected kindness nearly broke me again. I nodded wordlessly. When I'd calmed down enough to speak, I thanked her. "Look," she said awkwardly, "I know we're not friends, but that was pretty harsh out there. Amber gets like this before big events, super critical and stressed. Try not to take it personally." But it was personal. It had always been personal. That night, I booked a flight home for the following morning, leaving a note for Amber explaining that I wasn't feeling well. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone was exploding with messages, Amber raging about my selfishness, my mother demanding I return immediately to fix this mess, and my father's single text, "Your sister is very upset. Please call her." The following weeks were a blur of strained family dinners and passive-aggressive wedding planning sessions. Amber threatened multiple times to remove me from the wedding party entirely, only to be talked down by our mother, who was more concerned with appearances than my feelings. "What would people say if her only sister wasn't in the wedding?" I overheard her hissing to Amber on the phone. By the time the rehearsal dinner arrived, I was emotionally exhausted. I showed up exactly on time wearing the dress my mother had suggested after vetoing my first 3 choices. As the wedding party gathered for photos, I moved to join them only to be intercepted by Melissa. "Actually, Amber has decided to streamline the wedding party," she explained with practiced smoothness. "You'll be helping more behind the scenes now. The photos will look more balanced this way." I watched from the sidelines as they took group photos without me. My role had been reduced from maid of honor to what Melissa called a wedding assistant. Essentially, an unpaid worker at my own sister's wedding. The morning of Amber's wedding dawned bright and clear, the perfect May day she'd always dreamed of. Despite everything, I arrived at the venue early as promised, ready to fulfill whatever assistant duties were required of me. The bridal suite was a flurry of activity when I entered. Hairstylists, makeup artists, and bridesmaids in matching robes filled the space with excited chatter and nervous energy. I stood in the doorway, my garment bag containing the peach bridesmaid dress hanging from my shoulder, waiting for someone to acknowledge me. "Oh, Hazel, you're here," my mother said, finally noticing me. "The wedding coordinator needs help setting up the guest book and gift table." "But what about getting ready with everyone else?" I asked, gesturing to my garment bag. My mother's eyes darted to Amber, who was having her hair styled in the center of the room. "Just handle the guest book first. We'll figure out your hair and makeup after." For the next 2 hours, I arranged tables, directed early arriving vendors, and steamed tablecloths while still in my street clothes. When I finally returned to the bridal suite to get ready, only my mother and Amber remained, the other bridesmaids having moved to a separate room for final preparations. "Where's my dress?" I asked, noticing my garment bag was no longer where I'd left it. Amber turned to face me, already in her wedding gown, looking breathtakingly beautiful and utterly cold. "There's been a change of plans," she said with artificial sweetness. "We decided the wedding party was too large, and since you've been so busy helping behind the scenes, it made sense for you to attend as a regular guest." "A regular guest," I repeated, not comprehending. "But I'm your sister." "Mom thinks it's best," Amber continued, not meeting my eyes. "The dresses are really more flattering on the other girls, and we want the photos to have a certain aesthetic." My mother busied herself adjusting Amber's veil, refusing to look at me. The message was clear. I'd been completely cut from the wedding party, apparently deemed too unsightly to stand beside my perfect sister. "You can use the small powder room down the hall to get ready," my mother added, finally, glancing my way. "Your blue dress from Easter should be appropriate." The dress she referenced was 2 years old and slightly tight now, but I had nothing else with me. The humiliation burned through me as I gathered my purse with shaking hands. "I can't believe you're doing this," I whispered, tears threatening. "Don't make a scene, Hazel," my mother warned. "This is Amber's day." In the tiny powder room, I changed into my old dress and did my best with my hair and the minimal makeup I had in my purse. I stared at my reflection, a pale, tear-stained face looking back at me. For a moment, I considered walking out, driving home, and being done with all of it. But there was my father to consider. He'd been largely absent from the wedding drama, his usual method of avoiding conflict. He didn't deserve to have his daughter disappear from his other daughter's wedding. So I stayed applying another coat of mascara to my reddened eyes. The ceremony was set to begin at 4. I slipped into the garden where rows of white chairs faced an elaborate floral arch. Guests were already finding their seats, the front rows marked with reserved for family signs. I approached one such row only to be intercepted by an usher. "I'm sorry, these are reserved for family," he said politely. "I am family. I'm the bride's sister," I explained. His face registered confusion, then embarrassment, as he consulted his seating chart. "I'm so sorry, Miss Wilson. Your assigned seat is back there," he said, pointing to the far corner of the seating area, where a massive stone pillar obscured much of the view of the altar. I felt dozens of curious eyes on me as I made my way to the isolated seat. From this position, I could barely see the right side of the floral arch. Other guests glanced at me with confusion or pity, clearly wondering why the bride's sister was seated so far from the action. Through tears I could barely contain, I watched what little I could see of the ceremony. My father walked Amber down the aisle without a glance in my direction. My mother dabbed at proud tears in the front row. Vows were exchanged, rings given, and kisses shared, all while I strained to catch glimpses around the pillar that hid me from view. As guests filed out for cocktail hour, I remained seated, trying to compose myself before facing anyone. The reception was in the adjacent ballroom, and I dreaded what further humiliations might await. Sure enough, when I finally entered the reception, I discovered there was no place card with my name at the family table near the front. After an awkward conversation with the harried wedding coordinator, I was directed to what was clearly the leftovers table in the far corner of the room. Distant relatives, friends, random plus ones, and me once again behind a structural pillar that hid me from most of the room. My table companions made awkward small talk, clearly uncomfortable with the bride's sister being seated with them. I overheard one whisper to another, "Did they have a fight or something?" When dinner was served, the server initially missed our table, entirely hidden as it was from the main floor. By the time our meals arrived, they were lukewarm and I had lost what little appetite I had. Toasts began while I was still pushing food around my plate. From my position, I couldn't even see the head table, only hearing the voices of the best man and maid of honor through the sound system. When my father rose to give his speech about his girls and the joy of watching his daughter grow up, he never once mentioned he had 2 daughters. It was as if I had been erased from the family narrative entirely. After dinner, as professional photos were being taken, my mother approached my hidden table. "Hazel, if you want to be in a family photo, that's fine," she said, her voice making it clear it was not actually fine. "But maybe stay toward the back. The color of your dress doesn't really work with the wedding palette." That was the moment I realized I was truly invisible in my own family, a ghost at the feast, tolerated but unwanted. I sat alone at my table, fighting back tears as the celebration continued around me, the stone pillar my only companion. I was contemplating whether anyone would notice if I simply left when a tall figure appeared at the edge of my vision. I looked up to see one of Ryan's groomsmen, the one I'd noticed earlier during the ceremony but hadn't been introduced to. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, extending his hand with a warm, genuine smile that reached all the way to his eyes. I stared at his outstretched hand, certain he must be mistaking me for someone else. Me. "Unless there's someone else sitting alone behind this architectural monstrosity," he replied with a gentle humor that somehow didn't feel mocking. "I'm not really dressed for." I gestured vaguely at my plain blue dress amid the sea of formal attire. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "And everyone should dance at a wedding. I'm Ethan, by the way. Ryan's friend from college." His straightforward kindness nearly undid me. I hesitated, my insecurity warring with the desperate desire for human connection after hours of isolation. "I'm Hazel," I finally said, placing my hand in his. "The bride's sister." "I know," he replied, helping me to my feet. His eyes held a knowledge that told me he'd noticed more than he was saying. As he led me onto the dance floor, I felt painfully exposed. Amber's gaze locked onto us from across the room, her smile freezing in place. Several of the bridesmaids turned to stare, whispering behind their hands. Ethan seemed to sense my discomfort. With a subtle shift, he guided our dance toward the edge of the floor, where the lighting was dimmer and fewer eyes followed us. I'm not very good at this, I admitted, trying to follow his lead. You're doing fine, he assured me. Just relax and enjoy the music. For the first time that day, I felt myself smile, a genuine smile that started small but grew as Ethan purposely exaggerated a dance move, making me laugh despite myself. There it is, he said with satisfaction. I was beginning to think you couldn't smile. Haven't had much reason to today, I admitted. I noticed, he said simply. Family can be challenging. That's one word for it. As we continued to dance, Ethan shared pieces of himself. He was a pediatric surgeon who'd met Ryan during their undergraduate years. He loved jazz and cooking, and he too knew what it was like to feel like an outsider in his own family. My parents had my entire life planned, from birth, prestigious medical school, surgical specialty marriage, to my high school sweetheart, he explained. When I decided to focus on pediatrics instead of plastic surgery, you'd think I'd announced I was joining the circus. How did you handle it, I asked. Badly at first, he admitted. Tried to please everyone, ended up pleasing no one, least of all myself. Took me years to realize that family can be blind to the damage they cause when they're focused on their own expectations. His words resonated so deeply that tears sprang to my eyes again. He noticed immediately, his face softening with concern. I'm sorry, I said, trying to blink them away. It's been a long day. No need to apologize, he said, handing me a handkerchief from his pocket. From what I've observed, you've shown remarkable grace in an impossible situation. Before I could respond, Amber materialized beside us, her white gown gleaming under the dance floor lights. Her smile was picture-perfect and completely false. Hazel, I was wondering where you disappeared to, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. And dancing with one of our most eligible groomsmen. How lovely that you've finally found someone willing to take you for a spin. The cruelty of her words hung in the air between us. I felt myself shrinking back into the familiar pattern of swallowing her barbs to keep the peace. But Ethan didn't follow the script. Your sister has been kind enough to save me from standing awkwardly on the sidelines, he replied, his tone pleasant but firm. You must be very proud to have such a gracious sister supporting you today, despite being seated behind a pillar for both the ceremony and reception. Amber's smile faltered. There was a last-minute seating adjustment. These things happen. Indeed they do, Ethan agreed pleasantly. Just as people notice when family members are treated poorly. Congratulations on your wedding, Amber. It's been illuminating. Amber's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. For a moment I thought she might cause a scene, but image consciousness won out. With a tight smile and a warning glance at me, she turned and walked away immediately, latching onto Ryan's arm across the room. That was. I've never seen anyone stand up to her like that, I said once she was out of earshot. Ethan shrugged. I've spent my career advocating for kids who can't speak up for themselves. Becomes a habit. We continued dancing for another song, but I could feel Amber's glare boring into my back from across the room. Would you like to get out of here? Ethan asked suddenly. Get some fresh air. Or, he added, watching my face carefully, maybe leave altogether. The offer was tempting, more tempting than I wanted to admit, but years of conditioning made me hesitate. I can't, I said automatically. It would cause too much drama. It's Amber's wedding, and Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away, Ethan interrupted gently. Not forever, not burning bridges, but just for tonight. Give yourself permission to prioritize your own well-being. His words landed like a revelation. When had I last prioritized my own well-being over keeping the peace with my family? I looked around the reception at my mother charming the guests, my father drinking with his friends, Amber holding court as the center of attention. No one was looking for me. No one would miss me. Okay, I said, finally, surprising myself with how right it felt. Let's go. Ethan knew the venue layout better than I did, guiding me through a side door that led through the kitchen and out to a staff parking area. The cool evening air hit my face like a blessing after hours in the stuffy reception hall. My car's over there, he said, pointing to a sensible sedan. Unless you'd rather walk somewhere, there's a great little diner about 3 blocks down that stays open all night. The thought of sitting in a bright, normal place among regular people was suddenly incredibly appealing. The diner sounds perfect, I said. We must have been quite a sight walking into that 24-hour diner, him and his formal groomsmen, attire me in my too-tight blue dress. Both of us slightly underdressed for a wedding, but wildly overdressed for midnight pancakes. The elderly waitress didn't bat an eye, though simply leading us to a booth by the window and pouring coffee without being asked. You two look like you could use this. she said with the wisdom of someone who had seen everything in her years behind that counter. Ready to order, or do you need a minute? A minute, please, Ethan replied with a smile. When she walked away, we both exhaled, then laughed at our synchronized relief. I can't believe I just walked out of my sister's wedding, I said, the reality of it finally hitting me. I've never done anything like that before. Sometimes the first act of self-respect is the hardest, Ethan said, stirring cream into his coffee. For what it's worth, I've been watching how you've been treated all weekend. You have? I asked, surprised. He nodded. Ryan and I arrived 3 days ago. I saw you at the rehearsal dinner sitting alone while everyone took photos. I noticed how your mother spoke to you, how your sister seemed to go out of her way to exclude you. I kept waiting for someone to step in to say something. No one ever does, I said softly. I should have introduced myself sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. I shook my head. You're literally the only person who's been kind to me in months. Don't apologize for that. Over plates of breakfast food at midnight, still in our formal attire, Ethan and I talked like old friends reunited after years apart. He told me about his work with pediatric trauma patients, the rewards and heartbreaks of trying to heal children who'd been hurt by the very people meant to protect them. I see family dynamics at their worst in my job, he explained. Kids who've been made to feel worthless parents who use their children as extensions of their own egos. It gives you a radar for certain patterns. Like what you saw with my family, I said, understanding dawning. Like what I saw with your family, he agreed. The scapegoating is pretty textbook. Your sister's insecurity manifesting as cruelty, your parents enabling it, because it's easier than addressing the real issues. His assessment was so accurate it took my breath away. I found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone, the childhood slights that had accumulated like sediment over the years. The subtle ways I'd been made to feel less than, the exhausting effort of constantly seeking approval that was never given. You know you deserve better, right? Ethan asked after listening intently. The question hit me like a physical blow. Tears filled my eyes as I realized that deep down I'd never believed that. I'd accepted the narrative that I was the problem, that I was difficult, oversensitive, not good enough. I don't think I did know that I admitted my voice barely audible. Not until now. Ethan reached across the table, his hand covering mine. Family should build you up, not tear you down. The way they treat you says everything about them and nothing about your worth. As we talked, my phone buzzed repeatedly in my purse. When I finally checked it, I found dozens of missed calls and messages, Amber demanding to know where I'd gone, accusing me of deliberately trying to ruin her wedding. My mother insisting I return immediately. And my father's predictable text, "Your sister is upset. Please come back." Ethan watched as I scrolled through the barrage of guilt and demands. What do you want to do? He asked simply. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I made a decision based solely on what I needed in that moment. I want to turn off my phone for the night, I said, powering down the device. I'll deal with them tomorrow. Good choice, he said with an approving smile. Boundaries look good on you. After we'd finished our impromptu midnight breakfast, neither of us seemed ready for the evening to end. By unspoken agreement, we paid our bill and stepped out into the night, walking side by side down the quiet streets of the sleeping town. What will you say to them tomorrow? Ethan asked as we strolled. I'm not sure yet, I admitted. Part of me wants to lay everything out, all the hurt, all the years of being made to feel less than. But another part knows it won't change anything. They'll just say I'm being dramatic or trying to steal Amber's thunder. You don't owe them an explanation for taking care of yourself, Ethan said. But whatever you decide, remember that their reaction to your boundaries isn't your responsibility. As we walked, our hands brushed against each other, then somehow found themselves intertwined. The simple human connection felt like a lifeline after the isolation of the day. Would you like to meet for coffee tomorrow? Ethan asked as we reached a small park. Regardless of how things go with your family, it might be good to have someone to talk to. The genuine concern in his voice touched something deep within me. I'd like that very much, I replied. We made plans to meet the following afternoon, exchanged numbers, and finally reluctantly parted ways. As I watched him walk toward his car, I realized I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time: hope, and the first fragile beginnings of self-worth. I woke the next morning with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. As I powered on my phone, it immediately began buzzing with notifications, more missed calls, more accusatory texts, more guilt trips. But something had shifted inside me. The words that would once have sent me spiraling into anxiety and self-doubt now seemed merely sad, revealing more about the senders than about me. After showering and dressing with particular care, I texted my mother, "I'll be at your house at noon to talk." Then I silenced my phone, made myself breakfast, and spent the morning preparing what I needed to say. By the time I arrived at my parents' house, my hands were shaking slightly, but my resolve remained firm. I could see several cars in the driveway. Apparently, this would be a family audience. My mother opened the door before I could knock her expression, a careful mask of concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Finally," she said, ushering me inside. "Everyone's been worried sick." In the living room, Amber sat on the couch in designer loungewear, eyes red-rimmed either from crying or lack of sleep. My father occupied his usual armchair, looking uncomfortable and out of place in his own home. Ryan sat beside Amber, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. "Well, here she is," my mother announced. "Would you like to explain yourself, Hazel?" Amber didn't wait for me to speak. "How could you?" she demanded, voice trembling with theatrical emotion. "You disappeared from my wedding with one of Ryan's friends. Everyone was talking about it. You deliberately created drama on the most important day of my life." In the past, I would have immediately apologized, accepted blame, and spent weeks making amends for a transgression that existed only in Amber's mind. Today was different. I left because I was seated behind a pillar, excluded from family photos cut from the wedding party at the last minute, and treated like an embarrassing obligation rather than your sister, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I left because it was clear my presence wasn't wanted or valued. "That's not true," my mother interjected. "You're being melodramatic as usual." "Am I?" I asked, turning to face her. "You suggested I lose weight to fit a bridesmaid dress, then approved when Amber removed me from the wedding party entirely. You asked me to stay in the back of family photos because my dress didn't match the palette. You watched as I was seated where no one could see me and said nothing." The room fell silent. My father shifted uncomfortably, looking at the floor. "We were trying to make Amber's day special," my mother finally said, her voice smaller. "And that required humiliating me, making me feel worthless. Has it always been necessary to diminish me in order to elevate Amber?" Amber stood up, tears streaming down her face. "This is exactly what you always do, turn everything around to make yourself the victim. It was my wedding day." "Yes, it was your day," I agreed calmly. "And I would have happily supported you as your sister if I'd been treated with basic dignity and respect. But that's not what happened, and it's not what has ever happened in this family." I turned to face all of them, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. "I love you all, but I won't be treated this way anymore. I won't be the family scapegoat or emotional punching bag. I won't accept being hidden away because my appearance doesn't fit someone's aesthetic ideal. I deserve better than that." My mother's face hardened with displeasure. "If you're quite finished with this performance—" "It's not a performance, Mom," I interrupted quietly. "It's years of hurt finally being spoken aloud." For the first time since I'd arrived, my father cleared his throat and spoke. "Margaret," he said to my mother, "maybe we should listen." The surprise of his intervention momentarily silenced the room. My father, who had spent decades avoiding conflict at all costs, was actually speaking up. "Hazel has a point," he continued, looking at me directly for what felt like the first time in years. "The seating yesterday. It wasn't right. I should have said something." This small acknowledgement from my father, minimal as it was, felt monumental. Amber stared at him in betrayal while my mother's mouth opened and closed without sound. The conversation that followed wasn't easy or neat. There were tears, mine, and surprisingly, my father's raised voices, mostly Amber's and my mother's, and defensive deflections. No fairy tale resolution materialized. Years of dysfunctional patterns couldn't be undone in a single afternoon, but seeds were planted. After 2 exhausting hours, I left my parents' house feeling both drained and somehow lighter. Nothing had been resolved completely, but for the first time I had spoken my truth without backing down. Ethan was waiting at the coffee shop when I arrived, his face lighting up when he saw me. The genuine pleasure in his expression was a balm to my raw emotions. "How did it go?" he asked, after I'd gotten my latte and settled into the chair across from him. "Messy," I admitted. No Hollywood ending, but I said what I needed to say without apologizing for existing. "That's huge," he said, his eyes warm with understanding. "Boundaries aren't about changing other people, they're about changing what you'll accept." Over the next few weeks, Ethan became my anchor as I navigated the shifting landscape of my family relationships. He never overstepped or tried to fix things, but his steady presence and perspective helped me maintain my newfound strength. I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Chen, who specialized in family trauma. Our sessions helped me understand the dynamics that had shaped my self-perception and gave me tools to build healthier patterns. Family systems often resist change, Dr. Chen explained during one session. When you alter your role in the system by setting boundaries, everyone else has to adjust. That adjustment is rarely comfortable or welcome. This proved true as my family responded to my boundaries with varying degrees of resistance. My mother alternated between guilt trips and cold silence. Amber initially raged, then retreated into wounded victimhood. My father, however, surprised me by making awkward but genuine efforts to connect one-on-one, meeting me for lunch and actually asking about my work and life. Through it all, my relationship with Ethan evolved naturally from friendship to something deeper. Unlike previous relationships where I'd contorted myself to please partners with Ethan, I found I could simply be myself, quirks, insecurities, strengths, and all. "I like who I am when I'm with you," I told him one evening as we cooked dinner together in my apartment. "I don't feel like I'm constantly apologizing for taking up space." "That's because you don't need to apologize for existing," he replied, squeezing my hand. "You're perfect exactly as you are." The true test came at Thanksgiving, 6 months after the wedding. After much deliberation and preparation with Dr. Chen, I decided to attend family dinner with Ethan, accompanying me as moral support. We created a safety plan, code words for when we needed a break, permission to leave if boundaries were crossed, and my car positioned for easy exit. To my surprise, the dinner wasn't the disaster I'd anticipated. My mother was stiffly polite, my father made genuine efforts to engage both Ethan and me, and Amber, subdued by early struggles in her marriage, made a tentative, awkward attempt at normal conversation. As we drove home that night, Ethan took my hand across the console. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "That couldn't have been easy." It wasn't, I agreed. But for the first time, I felt like I was there on my terms, not theirs. That makes all the difference. 6 months after Amber's wedding, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined while sitting alone behind that stone pillar. Through consistent therapy, I developed a stronger sense of self-worth and clearer boundaries. My graphic design business was flourishing, partly because I'd stopped undervaluing my work and raised my rates to industry standards. I'd cultivated deeper friendships with people who appreciated me for who I actually was, not who they wanted me to be. My relationship with my family had evolved into something I'd describe as respectfully distant. We maintained contact, but with clear boundaries and expectations. I no longer attended every family function out of obligation, choosing instead to participate when it felt healthy for me to do so. The most surprising development came from Amber. 3 months after her wedding cracks had begun to appear in her picture-perfect marriage, Ryan's workaholic tendencies and Amber's unrealistic expectations collided spectacularly once the excitement of wedding planning was gone. During a particularly difficult period, she'd called me in tears, not to apologize exactly, but to acknowledge that perhaps she understood now what it felt like to be unseen. "Ryan works constantly, and when he is home, he barely looks at me," she'd confessed. "I keep thinking if I were prettier, more interesting, more successful, maybe he'd actually want to spend time with me." That vulnerable moment didn't instantly heal our relationship, but it opened a door to more honest communication. Amber had begun her own therapy journey, slowly recognizing patterns she'd inherited from our parents. "I've been thinking a lot about the wedding," she said during a tentative sister lunch in April. "About how I treated you. I was so focused on everything being perfect that I didn't see how I was hurting you. I'm not saying this very well, but I'm sorry, Hazel. I really am." Her apology wasn't perfect, but it was genuine, perhaps the first truly genuine interaction we'd had in years. We were building something new, not the close sisterhood of storybooks, but a relationship based on who we actually were, rather than the roles we'd been assigned. My parents, too, had shown capacity for growth, though in different ways. My father had begun making regular efforts to connect one-on-one, calling me weekly just to chat and showing interest in my work. My mother found change harder, still slipping into old critical patterns, but even she had moments of self-awareness that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. "Your father says I'm too hard on you girls," she admitted during a tense but honest conversation. "Maybe he's right. I just wanted you both to have better lives than I did." The most beautiful development, however, was my relationship with Ethan. What had begun with a simple outstretched hand at a wedding had evolved into the healthiest relationship of my life. Unlike the whirlwind romances I'd experienced before, our connection grew slowly and steadily built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. You know what I first noticed about you at the wedding? Ethan asked, as we walked along the beach during a weekend getaway. It wasn't that you were sitting alone or that your family was treating you poorly, though I did notice those things. It was the way you carried yourself through it all with this quiet dignity that most people would have lost. I didn't feel very dignified, I admitted, remembering the tears I'd fought to contain. That's what made it remarkable, he said, squeezing my hand. You were hurting, but still authentic, still fundamentally you. I wanted to know the woman who could remain herself under that kind of pressure. On the first anniversary of the day we'd met, Ethan took me to dinner at the same all-night diner where we'd escaped after leaving the wedding. We sat in the same booth, ordered the same midnight breakfast, and laughed about how overdressed we'd been that night. After we'd finished eating, Ethan reached across the table and took both my hands in his. A year ago, I watched you find the courage to walk away from people who couldn't see your value, he said, his voice soft but steady. I've spent every day since then grateful that you walked toward me instead. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not a traditional diamond solitaire, but a unique emerald surrounded by smaller stones that caught the diner's fluorescent lighting and transformed it into something magical. I designed it myself, he said nervously. The jeweler thought I was crazy with all my specific requests, but I wanted it to be as unique as you are. Tears filled my eyes as he continued. I don't want to create a perfect life according to someone else's standards, he said. I want to build a real one with you, messy, authentic, and completely our own. Will you marry me, Hazel? Yes, I whispered, then louder, yes. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from the invisible sister behind the pillar to a woman standing firmly in her own light. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become turning points that lead us exactly where we need to be. I've learned that family isn't just about blood relations, but about people who see you clearly and love what they see. I've discovered that setting boundaries isn't selfish, but necessary for genuine relationships. Most importantly, I've realized that sometimes sitting alone behind a pillar is exactly where you need to be to find your way forward. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's simple kindness changed everything for you? Or have you been the person who reached out a hand when someone needed it most? Share your story in the comments below. And if this journey of finding self-worth resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better too. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, the hardest moments often lead to the greatest transformations.